It was one of those nights when the fog clung low to the ground, wrapping the fields in a soft, trembling blanket. I remember walking past the old farmhouse at the edge of the woods, where the pale light from a single broken window flickered in rhythm with the wind. Every step I took on the damp grass made a quiet hiss beneath my boots, and the rustling of unseen leaves felt almost like someone breathing just behind me. Somewhere far off, a wind chime sang a hollow note, vibrating through the silence. I told myself it was just the night settling, that my imagination was painting shadows in the dark. But then I heard the soft creak of the porch, as if someone, or something, was stepping closer. My heartbeat slowed, and I whispered to myself to turn back. But curiosity held me frozen, and that's when I saw it. The wheat swayed gently, pale and endless, brushing against my fingertips. A soft wind carried something else, something that hummed. It wasn't music. Not quite words, just something alive, just beyond understanding. I walked slowly, my shoes sinking slightly into the dry earth. Each step made the stalks bend, scratch, whisper. I thought I heard a breath following me, though I was alone. The scarecrow leaned farther than it should, crooked and stiff. Its head tilted, eyes, or were they holes, seeming to watch me. A static shimmer ran along the edges of my vision. The light was pale, thinning, like it couldn't decide whether to hold or fade. I paused. A shadow stretched between the wheat, long and thin. When I blinked, it seemed closer. Closer, then gone. A faint whisper curled around my ears. I turned. Nothing. Only the wind, soft against my skin, carrying a smell of dry stalks and earth, warm beneath the sun that barely reached the horizon. I stepped forward again. The hum rose slightly, almost human, almost words I wanted to understand. The air thickened, heavy, sticky against my lungs. Every breath felt like it stirred the field, and the field whispered back. The scarecrow shifted. I was certain of it. Not a sway in the wind, not a lean in the stalks. It turned ever so slightly toward me. Its presence pressed against the edges of my mind. I kept walking. The wheat seemed to close in, brushing my arms like soft hands. A rustling grew behind me, gentle, deliberate. I didn't dare turn. I couldn't. The hum fractured into small notes, broken, fading in and out. I wanted to call out, to speak. But my voice felt caught, swallowed by the tall stalks. Only whispers responded, low, shivering, almost laughing. I reached a clearing I hadn't noticed before. The wheat parted like curtains, pale light pooling at my feet. A thin fog hovered over the soil, curling around the roots. I knelt, brushing it with my fingers. Cold, moist, quiet. Something moved in the fog. A shape, fleeting, bending and twisting. I thought it was a shadow, but it left a mark on the earth, a whisper in the soil. The hum softened, almost shy, almost waiting. I breathed slowly, tasting the air, earthy, sweet, almost metallic. The silence pressed in after, heavy and patient. Even the wind stilled, the scarecrow was gone. Or maybe it had always been there. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I took another step. The wheat brushed my cheek, soft, insistent. A voice, closer now, brushed past my ear. I didn't hear words, just intention. I froze. The field seemed to sigh. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched longer, thinner, reaching. I felt the pull of something beyond, something that wanted only to be noticed. I whispered to myself. Not aloud, a simple, fragile word. But it vanished before it touched the air. The hum faded. The fog thinned. The wheat swayed gently, pale and endless, brushing against my hands. And I realized I had walked too far into the whispers, too far into the wheat, too far to turn back. I stayed. Still, quiet, breathing with the field, waiting for the next whisper. The fog rolled in thick and low, curling around the fence posts like restless fingers. The night air was damp, clinging to my skin, carrying the faint smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. I walked slowly, shoes pressing into the soft ground. Each step swallowed by silence. A faint light appeared ahead. Lonely, flickering, perched on the porch of a derelict farmhouse that leaned too far to one side, as if straining to escape itself. The boards beneath it groaned, softly at first, then heavier, as if something moved across them, something careful, deliberate. I froze. The fog wrapped around me, sticky and insistent. From inside, I felt eyes, watching, waiting. The darkness behind the glass felt alive, shifting like smoke, pressing against the fragile glow of the porch light. I breathed slowly. The air was thick with cold, wet, and the faint tang of decay. Every exhale felt too loud, too bright, too human. Then a howl stretched across the fields, distant and hollow. It scraped against my bones, brushing through me with icy fingers. I felt smaller, fragile, and still the light flickered, pulsing, alone. The boards creaked again. A weight, unseen, moved above me. I imagined the shape of someone, or something, leaning from the doorway or crouched just beyond the rail. Every shadow seemed heavier, deeper, folding into itself. I stepped closer, drawn by a curiosity I could not name. The fog clung to my legs, curling and dragging like fingers unwilling to let go. I could taste the chill in my mouth, sharp and bitter like old iron. The light shivered, a quick pulse, then it died. Darkness swallowed the porch in one blink. I felt the air shift. The fog tightened around the posts, heavier now, pressing to see, to feel, to touch. The quiet was louder than any noise, a static thrum against my ears. Something in the dark moved. Not far, not near, but present. The farmhouse loomed like a shadow pressed against the night. Its windows were eyes, black and wide, staring without blinking. I wanted to look away, to run, but my feet were slow, weighted by the chill and the dread. I traced the edge of the porch with my hand, rough wood against my palm. The scent of old smoke and dust clung to it. I imagined someone, or something, had sat here, waiting, watching the same night sky, counting the stars as I did. A soft scuff of movement on the boards. Closer, then further. My heart hummed against the silence, too loud in comparison. The howl returned, nearer this time, bending across the fog. It made the air tremble. I pressed my back to a post, cold and damp, leaning into its solidity. The porch light remained dead, yet I felt the presence shift, circling, observing. A whisper of wind carried through the cracks in the boards, brushing my cheek, warm and cold at once. I wanted to step forward, to touch the door, to confirm the emptiness, but something in me stayed, held fast by the quiet. The house did not move, yet it breathed, inhaling, exhaling, patient and patient. The fog began to thin slowly, curling back into the fields. The porch stayed dark. I could feel the absence of the light, and in that absence, something waited. I stepped back, my shoes wet with dew, my hands cold against the air. The farmhouse receded slightly, but the eyes remained, watching from within. The howl faded into the distance, leaving only the soft creak of the boards beneath invisible feet. And I realized, quietly, that the porch had never been lonely at all. I had simply been invited to notice, to witness, to wait. The night was cool, wrapped in a mist that clung to my skin. I walked slowly, shoes sinking into soft earth, damp with dew and decay. The air smelled faintly of moss and old stone, heavy with forgotten rain. Ahead, a shape emerged through the fog. A well-forgotten, its stones rough and slick with moss. It leaned slightly, uneven, as if it had sighed into the earth centuries ago. I knelt at the edge, fingertips brushing the cold stone. The water below reflected the pale moon, but the surface shivered, small ripples twisting like something had moved beneath. A soft knock echoed up from the depths. Slow, deliberate, not random, not natural. It pressed against the silence, folding it, stretching it, until every breath felt too loud. I leaned closer, smelling damp stone and something older, something that had waited. My reflection hovered above the water. It was me, but something leaned behind me, just a fraction, unblinking. I could not see it directly, but I felt it pressing against my back, light, almost teasing. The knocking stopped. Sudden, a vacuum of sound that made my ears ache. The water stilled, cold and glassy. I dared to stare, and my reflection wavered. The moonlight fractured across the surface, scattering shadows like small birds. I imagined the thing behind me shifting closer, patient, curious, silent. The moss whispered under my fingers. I pressed my hand flat against it, rough and damp. A small drop of water slid down the stones, plinking softly into the well. Each drop sounded heavier than it should, a pulse against the quiet night. I leaned over, searching for any hint of movement beneath the surface. The water mirrored me exactly, except a twitch, a hesitation, as if something had stepped aside just in time. The air was thick with expectation, cold against my chest, wet on my cheeks. I breathed slowly, tasting the night. Metal, wet stone, and a faint rot I couldn't place. The fog shifted, brushing my arms and hair like soft hands, restless, lingering. My shadow flickered along the moss, stretching long and thin into the darkness behind me. Another tap, almost a heartbeat, came from the well. I flinched but didn't move my head. The sound was patient, measured, and then it ceased abruptly again. Only the fog remained, curling and folding around the stones, indifferent. I knelt longer, feeling the cold seep into my bones. The moonlight reflected in the water, pale, almost white. I wanted to see the depths, to know what waited. But the stillness pressed, heavy, patient, unyielding. I traced the edge of the well with my fingers, rough, slick, alive with damp. The smell of earth and water filled my nostrils, mingling with something I could not name. I imagined the thing behind me, leaning closer, tasting the air I breathed, quiet, unseen. The night held me there, still, balanced between curiosity and dread. The water shimmered faintly in the moonlight, unbroken. The knocking would not return. I finally drew back, standing on the damp earth. The fog thinned slightly, curling toward the fields beyond. The well remained, patient, silent, waiting. And I walked away, feeling eyes on my back, never daring to glance. The house smelled of dust and old wood, heavy and dry. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning beneath me. The air was still, yet something shifted in it, brushing my neck with a cold breeze. The windows were closed. The attic door loomed above me, warped and heavy. I reached for the knob. The wood felt rough, splintered beneath my fingertips. The hinges sighed as I pushed it open, a breath escaping from the dark beyond. Inside, the air was thick with memory. Dust danced in pale shafts of moonlight, floating like tiny ghosts. The floorboards creaked under each careful step, sending vibrations up through my feet. A tapping began, soft, intermittent. It moved from one corner to another, almost playful, almost deliberate. I paused, listening. My own heartbeat sounded too loud. The attic smelled stronger now. Wood, dust, and something faintly sour, like old cloth left wet too long. I moved forward, hand brushing against a rafter. The air pressed in, cool and uneven, wrapping around my shoulders, teasing my hair. The tapping followed. It shifted with me, tracing each movement, always just behind, never fully close, never fully gone. I stopped again. The silence was louder than the sound. A shadow stretched across the floor, fractured by moonlight through a small, grimy window. It bent strangely, like it moved differently than I did. I reached for it, fingers trembling, but the shadow recoiled, folding back into the corners. The boards groaned as I stepped toward the far side of the attic. The tapping intensified, light, insistent, pressing against my senses. I smelled it then, old paper, cedar, something metallic underneath, faint but sharp. It made the air thick and impossible to ignore. I paused, hand on my chest, listening. The attic seemed to breathe with me. Every creak, every draft, every tap felt alive. A cold breath brushed my neck again. I swiveled, eyes scanning the corners. Nothing moved. Nothing visible. The tapping stopped. Just like that. The silence pressed in, heavy and patient, settling over me like dust on forgotten furniture. I took a step forward. The air shifted slightly, brushing my arms. The floor felt softer, as if I walked through something unseen. Waiting, my shadow quivered on the walls. A loose rafter above shifted slightly, and a faint whisper of movement slid through the attic. It was not wind, not a small animal. Something unseen mirrored me, tracing, watching, patient. I breathed slowly, tasting the dust, the cold, the faint metallic tang. My footsteps were deliberate now, careful, echoing in the hollow space. Each creak felt like an answer. Each silence felt like a question. I stopped near the center, chest tight, hands brushing against the floorboards. The attic waited. It had always waited, and I felt it, patient and silent, pressing against my skin, following me in ways I could not see. The moonlight shifted. Shadows trembled along the rafters and walls. The tapping resumed for a brief second, then vanished again. I did not move. The attic seemed smaller now, heavier. I could smell dust, wood, and the faint tang of something older, lingering in the air. Every breath felt thick, slow, a pulse against the quiet. I finally turned, stepping carefully back toward the stairs. The attic did not change. The tapping did not follow. It waited. I paused at the top of the stairs, hand on the railing. The air was still, cool, and heavy with anticipation. I exhaled slowly, feeling the pressure of unseen eyes on my back. And I descended quietly, leaving the attic to its patient, silent watch. The barn loomed ahead, dark and hollow. Its wood smelled of old hay, sweet and cloying, sticky in the cool night air. I stepped closer, boots pressing into soft soil, every movement swallowed by the silence. The doors hung slightly ajar, creaking faintly as they shifted in the still air. I reached for the frame, rough wood under my fingers, and pushed slowly inside. The space smelled heavier, a mix of earth, hay, and dust long settled. Something moved in the shadows. Not far, not near, just shifting along the walls. The rustling circled me, soft, deliberate, brushing against the air. I stopped, listening. The quiet pressed in around me. A lantern hung from a beam, swinging slightly. No wind. Its pale light trembled across the hay and beams, pooling and fading with each small swing. I felt the cold draft on my neck again, even though the doors were closed. I stepped forward. The rustling followed, circling with me, patient, deliberate. The smell of hay grew stronger, almost sweet, almost cloying, pressing against my senses. Every breath felt thick, wet, alive. Something moved just beyond the door frame. A silhouette, pale, thin. I blinked. Gone. The barn seemed to hold its breath. The wood groaned beneath me, soft and hollow. I could feel shadows brushing the edges of my vision, stretching, bending in impossible ways. I walked slowly down the aisle, hand trailing along the rough beams. The rustling moved ahead, then behind, then ahead again, always just out of reach. The lantern swung in silence, casting shadows that danced, fractured, waiting. I paused. The air was thick with something I could not name. Wet earth, old hay, and a metallic tang, faint, almost imagined. I tried to follow the movement with my eyes. The shadows flickered, always shifting just before I could see clearly. A small sound, soft, like fabric brushing against wood, echoed from the corner. I froze. The barn pressed around me, heavy and patient, holding its quiet. The rustling stopped for a heartbeat, then began again, circling, patient, insistent. I stepped closer to the lantern. The light pooled brighter, illuminating the hay stacked against the walls. Nothing moved. But I felt it. Presence careful, observing. A draft brushed my hair. The air smelled warmer here, stagnant and dense, carrying a whisper of decay. I imagined the silhouette returning, leaning from a shadowed beam, patient, watching. But when I blinked, it was gone again. I breathed slowly, trying to ground myself in the barn, in the scent, in the rough wood beneath my fingers. The lantern swung lightly, shadows folding and stretching. Every creak in the boards, every soft shuffle of air felt amplified. The rustling continued, circling, then paused, waiting. The barn seemed to exhale with me, silent and patient. I stepped back toward the doors. The silhouette never returned. The lantern swung, pale and patient. The hay smelled sweet, cloying and heavy in the still air. I left the barn slowly, boots soft on the soil. The rustling faded into silence. The shadows remained, patient, waiting. The room smelled of damp plaster and old wood, heavy and quiet. Dust clung to the corners, thick, undisturbed. A cracked mirror leaned against the far wall, pale light reflecting uneven shapes. I stepped closer. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my weight. The air felt colder here, clinging to my skin, brushing my hair like fingers. My reflection shimmered in the glass. It lagged behind me, slow, almost deliberate. I tilted my head. My reflection hesitated, then followed. I smiled, small and cautious. The shadow behind the glass did not. It stayed still, patient, bending around the edges of the cracked mirror. A faint tapping began. Slow, counting, impossibly precise. Each tap pressed against the silence, folding it, stretching it, until my own heartbeat felt too loud. I reached toward the glass, fingertips brushing the cracked surface. The cold pressed back, unyielding, alive. The faint smell of metal and dust rose from the frame, curling around my senses. The light flickered above me, dim, then steady again. Shadows in the corners shifted, long, thin, impossible. The tapping continued, patient, counting, unbroken. I moved closer, trying to meet the reflection. The mirror hesitated. My reflection smiled faintly. The shadow behind it did not. I swallowed. The room pressed in with the weight of quiet, heavy and still. The dust rose slightly under my movement, floating in pale streaks of light, fragile and slow. The tapping slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than before, almost solid. I could feel the shadow, patient and still, waiting beyond the cracked glass. I leaned closer. The reflection mirrored me exactly except for the shadow. It lingered, silent, watching, patient. It did not blink. It did not breathe. I felt regret curling in my chest. A slow, creeping pull that pressed against my ribs, settling deep. I had looked. I had seen. And now something had noticed me in return. I stepped back, hand trailing along the wall, rough and cool. The tapping returned briefly, counting once, twice, slow, impossibly. Then nothing. The mirror remained, cracked, pale, patient. The shadow lingered behind it, unchanged, unblinking. I exhaled slowly. The room smelled of dust and damp plaster, of metal and something older, impossible to name. I walked away, but I could feel it watching still, counting, waiting, patient. The grass rose taller than my knees, pale and trembling in the fog. Each step pressed the stalks aside, soft and wet with dew. The air smelled of damp earth, moss, and something faintly metallic lingering on the breeze. I walked slowly, listening. Soft footsteps followed. They matched mine exactly. I stopped. So did they. The fog thickened, curling around the stalks like restless fingers. The world narrowed to gray, damp, and soundless but for the faint echo of steps. I moved faster. They moved faster, too. Not chasing, not rushing, simply keeping pace. I shivered. The fog clung to my arms, wet and cold, brushing against my neck. A low whisper rose, barely audible, curling around me. It called my name. I froze again. The whisper did not repeat. Only the soft pressure of something unseen lingering just beyond reach. The grass rustled under my hands as I moved forward. The path seemed to twist beneath my feet, subtle, impossible, shifting as if alive. Each step pressed deeper into the mist. I could feel it, presence, patient and curious, shadowing my movement. The fog thickened further, swallowing shapes, flattening distance. My own shadow blurred against the gray, stretched long and thin into nothing. Another whisper, soft and deliberate. Not my name this time, but breathy, careful, almost patient. It followed me through the fog, brushing against my skin. I could smell earth, wet grass, and the faint decay of old leaves. The footsteps continued, matching mine without fail. I dared a glance behind me. Nothing. Only fog folding over itself. But the echo remained. I moved slower, trying to feel the rhythm of the field, of the unseen. The fog pressed tighter now, cold and damp, brushing hair and cheeks like soft fingers. The path twisted again, subtly, almost teasing, bending around a shadow I could not name. I stepped forward, fingertips brushing tall grass. It whispered against my palms, wet, alive, brushing my skin like a warning. The steps followed. Always following, I paused one final time. The field fell silent but for the whispering fog and the soft, patient rhythm of steps. I could feel the presence, patient, curious, just beyond the reach of vision. I exhaled slowly. The grass pressed around me, wet and fragrant, tangled and alive. The fog shifted slightly, curling back, revealing the faint path I had walked. But the echo of footsteps remained. I moved on, carefully, slowly. The whisper faded, leaving only the fog and the soft, patient rhythm behind me. The field seemed endless, gray and quiet. Yet I could feel it, still following, still waiting. The trail was narrow, overgrown, and forgotten. Fog clung to the ground, curling around the roots of skeletal trees. The air smelled damp and cold, thick with earth and something faintly metallic. Lanterns hung from the branches, swinging gently, pale light shimmering through the mist. I stepped closer. The glow revealed faces, pale, fleeting, just glimpses between the fog and shadows. They seemed to watch, waiting, patient. I reached toward a lantern. It swayed just out of reach. The wood of the branch brushed my fingertips, cold and rough. The light shivered, shifting across the fog, brushing my cheeks and arms. A soft hum began beneath the lantern. Low, slow, impossible to place. It threaded through the trees, curling around me, brushing my skin, tickling the back of my neck. I shivered, feeling it in my chest as well as my ears. I stepped forward, breath slow, careful. The path behind me had vanished. Fog and shadow swallowed it whole. I was alone, yet not alone. Another lantern swung gently. Its light revealed a face, half-formed, blurred at the edges, watching silently. I blinked. It was gone. The hum continued, low, winding, almost playful, almost deliberate. I reached toward it again. The lantern receded slightly, drifting beyond my touch, teasing, patient. The fog pressed against my legs, cool and wet, curling into boots and socks. The lantern swung slowly, shadows flickering across the twisted trunks. Every glimpse of a face made me pause. Every pause made the fog seem heavier. I breathed in the night, damp earth, old wood, and something faintly sweet, almost cloying. The hum wove through my senses, pressing gently against my ears, my chest, my mind. I tried to step back, but the path seemed narrower, folding in, impossible to retrace. A soft rustle passed over my shoulder. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only fog curling between the trees, shadows stretching impossibly long. Yet the feeling of being watched pressed closer. I reached for a lantern again. The light tilted, shifting across the fog, revealing another pale face. It did not move, did not blink, only waited. The hum softened, curling into silence. The path remained gone behind me. Lanterns swayed gently, slow and patient, casting pale reflections across the fog. The faces had vanished, leaving only memory. I exhaled slowly. The fog wrapped around me like a soft blanket, cold and damp. The lanterns hung, still swinging. And I realized the path had disappeared entirely, leaving me alone with the pale light and the waiting shadows. The farmhouse smelled of dust and old wood, stale and patient. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I moved slowly through the empty rooms. The air was thick, still, and tinged with something faintly metallic. An old radio sat on a table, its surface slick with dust. I brushed a fingertip across it, cold, smooth. A low hum began from the speaker, vibrating softly through the air through my chest. Static filled the room, harsh, sharp, yet strangely soft at the edges. Then whispers emerged. Names, dates, warnings. They curled around the walls, brushing my ears, weaving through the stale air. I leaned closer. The dial spun on its own, slow, deliberate, until it stopped. The station it landed on did not exist. The static hissed, thick and dense, folding the silence into itself. I shivered. The hum threaded through the floorboards, curling around my ankles, rising through my chest. The whispers repeated, almost melodic, almost patient, filling the empty farmhouse. They pressed against my skin, wet and soft, brushing hair and neck. A familiar name whispered faintly. Then my own. I froze. My voice, caught in the static, murmured from the speaker. I could not move, could not breathe. The dial shifted slightly, trembling under invisible fingers. The whispers became warnings curling in around me, soft but insistent. I could feel the cold press against my back, the edges of shadow folding inward. I stepped closer, hands brushing the radio, feeling the smooth, cold metal beneath my fingertips. The air smelled of dust, old paper, and a faint tang I could not place. The static thickened, filling my ears, vibrating against my teeth, curling into my chest. I leaned closer still. The whispers threaded into my name again, patient, deliberate. The hum pulsed, low and steady, aligning with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I could feel it in the walls, in the floor, in the air pressed close. The dial trembled once more, then settled. The voices fell silent. The hum lingered, low and patient, curling through the empty room. I could still feel it brushing my skin, brushing my thoughts. I exhaled slowly. The radio sat still now, quiet, waiting, patient. The farmhouse remained empty, dust motes drifting in the pale light, still and silent. Yet the memory of the whispers lingered, and I could still hear my own voice, faint, soft, folded into the static. I stepped back, careful, slowly. The hum faded, leaving only the quiet press of the air, the weight of the room, and the faint metallic tang lingering on my tongue and fingers. The radio remained. Patient, waiting. The garden lay ahead, tangled and overgrown. Thorned vines twisted along the ground, brushing my hands as I stepped through. The air was damp, smelling of earth, wet leaves, and something faintly sweet I could not name. Fog curled around the flowers, pale light glowing faintly from petals too still to be real. I moved slowly, boots pressing into soft, damp soil. The glow pulsed gently, brushing my skin, teasing my eyes, beckoning me forward. Shapes darted among the foliage, quick, deliberate, always just out of focus. I reached toward one. It vanished before my fingers could touch it. A soft rustle followed me, leaves brushing against each other, the vines pressing against my arms like gentle hands, patient and slow. A fountain appeared ahead, stone-worn and slick with moss. Near it crouched a figure, pale and still, like marble carved into human form. I stepped closer. It remained motionless. I inhaled slowly, tasting the damp air, smelling earth and faint, sweet flowers. The figure blinked once, or perhaps not at all. I reached forward. When my fingers brushed the edge of the fountain, the figure was gone. The garden stretched around me, dense, tangled, alive. Glowing flowers dotted the fog, soft and patient, illuminating shadows that moved, shifted, flitted. I could hear faint whispers in the rustling vines, soft, patient, almost musical. The air brushed my face, cool and damp, curling around my neck and shoulders. Thorns pressed lightly against my arms as I moved, careful, deliberate. Each step felt heavier, slower, as though the garden itself was watching, waiting. I paused near the fountain, fingertips tracing the worn stone. The figure did not return. The shadows flitted, unseen shapes moving just beyond reach, patient, deliberate. A faint hum rose from the flowers, soft and low, curling around me, pressing gently into my chest. The fog thickened, curling and folding, brushing my cheeks, masking the glowing petals in its gray embrace. The garden seemed endless, patient, alive in quiet ways I could not name. I stepped backward, careful, boots pressing into damp soil. The flowers glowed faintly, but the shapes in the fog had vanished. The fountain remained still, patient, stone cold beneath my fingertips. The air smelled of earth and wet leaves, faintly sweet and impossibly old. The garden pressed in on all sides, silent and watchful, bending light and shadow in impossible ways. I exhaled slowly, tasting fog and damp, leaving my breath lingering in the cool air. I turned, stepping toward the path I had entered by. The garden seemed smaller, denser, closing in, patient. The glowing flowers pulsed faintly as I moved, a slow rhythm, a heartbeat against the silence. I paused once more, fingertips brushing a thorned vine. Soft, cold, patient. The figure did not return. Only the fog, the glowing flowers, and the quiet hum of the garden remained. I walked on slowly, carefully. The shapes had vanished, the fog curling in soft waves around my feet. Yet the garden lingered, patient, watching, alive. The hallway stretched before me, long, narrow, and empty. Dust floated in the pale light, curling around door frames and along the floorboards. The air smelled of old wood and something faintly sour, patient and pressing. Each step I took pressed the boards beneath me. They groaned, soft but deliberate, echoing down the endless corridor. I paused. A heavier creak answered, though I could see nothing. Doors along the hallway opened slightly on their own. A nudge, a shift, a sigh of wood. The edges of the frames pressed shadows into the pale light. I felt eyes, patient, just beyond the reach of my vision. The air pressed against my skin, cool and dry. I moved forward slowly, hand brushing the wall, rough and splintered beneath my fingertips. Shadows stretched across the floor, long and thin, never aligned with the light above. A soft rustle passed behind me. I turned, heart tight, chest pressing against the cold air. Nothing. Only the hallway, endless and patient. Each step creaked beneath my weight. I paused. The creaks continued, softer, lighter, as though someone, or something, moved ahead of me, just out of reach. The air smelled faintly of dust and old plaster, mingled with a cold tang that pressed against my nose. The doors shifted again. A gentle swing, slow, deliberate. I could feel the air move around them, curling, patient. The shadows along the walls bent, twisting, folding into corners where the light could not reach. I stepped forward, careful, slow. The hallway seemed to lengthen with each step, stretching beyond reason. Shadows flickered along the boards and walls, patient, deliberate, moving just differently than they should. A soft whisper drifted along the air, almost lost, almost imagined. I froze, listening. Nothing repeated. Only the creaks and shifting wood, slow and deliberate, patient. I reached a door at the end. It was slightly ajar. The shadow along the frame stretched toward me, long, thin, and impossible. I paused, hand hovering over the knob. The air felt heavier here, pressed close, almost damp, brushing my face. The hallway seemed to watch, patient, waiting. Every floorboard groaned in response, echoing my heartbeat, my breath, my hesitation. I stepped back slowly. The doors remained open, the shadows stretched impossibly. The hallway continued, endless. The soft creaks continued, patient, deliberate, always just beyond reach. I exhaled slowly. The air smelled of dust and wood, faintly metallic now, pressing against my skin. The hallway stretched behind me, silent, patient. And I walked on, careful, leaving the echoes and shadows behind, though I could feel them still watching. The ridge rose slowly beneath my feet, rocky and uneven. The wind pressed against my face, cold, damp, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and pine. Below, the valley was swallowed in fog, thick and patient, curling around trees and hills like restless fingers. I stepped closer to the edge. Shapes moved just beyond sight, flickering through the gray mist. I could not name them. I could not reach them. The ground hummed beneath me, low, steady, vibrating through my boots, through my legs, threading into my chest. I paused. The air pressed closer, damp and heavy, brushing hair and skin with soft insistence. I leaned forward, eyes straining through the fog. Nothing emerged clearly. Only the shifting gray, curling, folding, masking the valley below. Yet I felt it, watching, patient, hidden within the mist. A shadow brushed along the ridge, quick and silent. I blinked. It vanished, leaving only fog curling across stones and twisted roots. The hum pulsed, steady, low, pressing against my ears, vibrating through the ridge, threading into my bones. I shivered. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, pine, and something older I could not name. I stepped carefully forward, boots crunching over stones and roots. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles, pressing soft and damp against my legs. Shapes flickered again, just beyond reach, moving with deliberate patience. I felt a presence, patient and quiet, observing from within the mist. Not hostile, not kind. Just there, waiting, folding the fog around itself. The wind shifted, carrying the hum with it, curling into my chest and ears. I reached out, fingertips brushing the cold air. The fog shifted too, flowing around my fingers, revealing nothing, yet pressing closer, patient. I inhaled slowly, tasting damp stone and mist, cold and sharp. The shapes vanished again. The valley remained hidden beneath the endless gray. Yet the feeling of observation lingered, patient, silent, impossible to ignore. I stepped back from the edge. The ridge stretched behind me, sharp and uneven, pressed into fog and shadow. The hum softened, curling through the ground, leaving only the cold press of air and damp against my skin. I exhaled slowly, breath curling in the fog, mingling with the gray that swallowed the valley. The shapes had vanished. The ridge remained, patient, and the mist shifted endlessly, hiding secrets I could not reach. I walked slowly along the ridge, careful, deliberate. The fog followed, curling around my legs, brushing my face, pressing soft and damp against my shoulders. I could feel it watching, always watching, patient and endless. The valley remained hidden. The hum lingered faintly. The fog shifted once more, revealing nothing. And still the feeling remained. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. I walked slowly through the clearing, boots pressing into soft, cold soil. Fog curled low, twisting around the trunks of the skeletal trees. An old swing hung from a gnarled branch, moving gently without wind. The chains creaked softly, rhythmical, patient. Each swing pressed the cold metal against my fingertips as I approached. A faint laughter echoed in the distance. Soft, distant, deliberate. It rose and fell with the wind, teasing, impossible to place. Shadows danced along the trees, stretching and bending, reaching toward the swing. They moved with deliberate patience, curling along roots and branches. The fog swirled around them, brushing my ankles and calves, wet and cold. I stopped beside a puddle. My reflection shimmered, distorted in the rain-soaked surface. And then I saw it. A figure crouched behind me, pale, still, watching. I turned. Nothing. The swing continued its rhythmical creak, moving slowly back and forth, patient, alive. I could feel it pressing against my skin, the cold metal of the chains brushing my fingers. The fog pressed around me, curling through the air, damp and insistent. Another faint laugh drifted, soft, patient, curling around my ears and chest. I tried to follow it with my eyes. Shapes moved through the mist, quick, deliberate, just beyond reach. The puddle reflected the figure again. It was closer now, pale and still, shadowed beneath the fog. I stepped back. It vanished before my eyes, leaving only the reflection of the empty swing and me. I breathed slowly. The fog shifted, curling around the swing's arc, brushing my shoulders and cheeks. The laughter faded into distance, replaced by the creak of chains, steady, rhythmic. I reached toward the swing. It swayed slightly as though acknowledging my presence, teasing, patient. The ground beneath my boots felt cold, damp, alive with the press of shadows. I stepped away, careful, leaving the puddle behind. The swing moved still, back and forth, shadows stretching toward it, curling in the mist. The fog pressed close, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and decay. I exhaled slowly. The clearing was quiet now, save for the soft creak of the swing. The shadows lingered, patient, always just beyond reach. And in the puddle, the figure watched still, fading only when I looked away. I moved forward, boots pressing into the damp earth. The swing continued, rhythmic, patient, a silent heartbeat in the fog. And I walked on, careful, leaving the hollow echoes behind, though I could feel them lingering. The room smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic. I stepped lightly across the floorboards, careful not to disturb the quiet. The air was still, heavy, pressing against my skin. A sudden chill brushed my neck. I turned, slow, deliberate. No one was there. The window pane fogged and frosted, delicate crystals forming despite the warmth of the season. I pressed a fingertip to the glass. Cold, fragile, patient. The frost spread slowly, curling along the edges like delicate veins. A whisper drifted through the room. Soft, deliberate, almost melodic. A warning. I shivered, the air pressing close, damp and impossibly cold. The chill lingered, brushing my shoulders and nape. It moved with me, patient, almost sentient. I stepped back, careful, boots pressing into the worn floorboards. The shadows shifted with the light, bending along walls and corners. The whisper came again, soft, curling around my ears and chest. I could feel it pressing against my skin, brushing my hair, curling down my spine. I exhaled slowly, breath curling in the frigid air. The frost thickened along the window, pale light refracting into the room, painting the walls in cold patterns. The chill followed, brushing fingers across my arms, patient, deliberate. I moved toward the center of the room, careful, slow. The whisper lingered, fading and returning, folded into the air like smoke. The cold pressed closer, almost alive, brushing my neck and chest, threading through my clothes. I paused, hand trembling, fingertips brushing a table edge. The room remained still, silent, yet the chill lingered, a weight pressing against my skin. The whisper softened, patient, insistent, curling around my thoughts. I exhaled again, slow, deliberate. The frost traced patterns along the window pane, delicate and impossible, pressing the cold into the air. The chill lingered, brushing, patient, almost waiting. I stepped backward, careful, boots pressing lightly into the floor. The whisper receded slightly, leaving only the cold against my neck and shoulders. I could feel it there, patient, deliberate, impossible to shake. The room smelled of cold wood and metal, damp and sharp. I breathed slowly, tasting the chill, pressing patience and fear into the air around me. The frost shimmered in pale light, the whisper faded, yet the cold remained. I exhaled slowly, leaving the room carefully, each step measured. The chill lingered in the corners, brushing walls and floorboards, patient. And as I left, I could feel it watching, almost sentient, waiting for the next breath, the next movement, the next pause. The barn stood silent, shadows pooling along its worn boards. The air smelled of dry hay and something faintly metallic. I stepped closer, boots pressing into the soft, uneven ground. The door swung open slowly into darkness. A hush pressed against me, heavy and patient. I stepped inside. Shapes shifted along the walls, subtle and deliberate, folding into the shadows. The smell of old hay pressed against my nose, sweet and cloying, mingling with the chill of the barn. I could hear soft rustling, moving beneath the stacks of hay. A form crouched low, hidden. It froze as I stepped closer, as though waiting, patient. I blinked. It vanished. A single lantern hung in the center of the barn. It swayed slowly, rhythmical, untouched. The pale light stretched shadows across the walls, long and thin, bending strangely. The rustling continued, circling, deliberate. The air pressed cold against my arms and neck, brushing hair and skin. I stepped forward carefully, boots crunching against loose straw. Shadows moved with subtle patience. I could see them fold into corners, pressing against the walls, hiding, waiting. The lantern light trembled, brushing gold across the boards and hay, revealing nothing solid. The form remained unseen, just impressions in the air, shifting with the soft light. I breathed slowly, the smell of hay thick and sweet, almost cloying. Every creak of the boards echoed in the silence. Patient, deliberate, I reached the center beneath the lantern. Its light trembled softly above me, swaying in a rhythm I could not trace. The rustling stopped. Only shadows lingered, pressing along the walls. I exhaled slowly. The barn felt alive, patient, watching, folding the shadows around itself. I could feel it, deliberate, patient, pressing lightly against my skin. The lantern continued its sway, untouched by wind or movement. Shadows shifted subtly with it, long, thin, impossible. I stepped back, careful, boots brushing straw. The barn remained silent save for the swaying light and soft impressions in the shadows. I could smell hay and the faint tang of cold metal pressed into the still air. The form had vanished completely. Yet I could feel it waiting. I moved toward the door slowly, careful, deliberate. The lantern continued, patient, rhythmic, swaying gently. The shadows pressed close along the walls, folding into corners impossible to reach. I exhaled again, slow, deliberate. The barn felt alive, patient, full of unseen eyes. And as I stepped outside, the soft sway of the lantern followed me in memory, lingering in the quiet night. The room smelled of dust and old wood. I stepped slowly across the floorboards, careful not to disturb decades of silence. Cobwebs brushed my face, soft, tickling, patient. A candle flickered to life on its own, wick dancing in pale, sudden flame. The air shimmered around it, thin and still, carrying the faint scent of wax and something older, faintly metallic. Shadows twisted along the walls, bending into impossible angles, folding into corners that could not exist. The faint hum pressed against my chest, low, steady, vibrating through the floor, through my boots, threading into my bones. I inhaled slowly, tasting dust and cold air, the hum curling in my throat. A whisper called from the corner, soft, deliberate, almost melodic. It folded around my ears, brushing hair and skin, curling through the silence. The candle flared suddenly, flame lashing higher, stretching shadows into jagged lines across the walls. I stepped back, careful, boots pressing into the creaking boards. The shadows twisted with it, patient, deliberate, impossible. The hum deepened, subtle, insistent, vibrating through the air and floorboards. The candle flickered, dancing in rhythm with the unseen presence. The whisper curled again, close now, brushing the nape of my neck, brushing along my arms. I moved closer, hesitant, careful. The shadows stretched toward me, impossibly long, bending corners and edges that could not exist. The hum threaded through the floor, soft and cold, pressing against my chest. I held my breath, tasting dust and wax, air pressing damp against my face. The candle's flame shivered, flaring and retreating, casting long fingers of light across the walls. The whisper moved, patient, curling in patterns I could not trace. I stepped forward. The flame responded, stretching higher, shadows folding and twisting. The hum vibrated stronger, pressing against my bones, threading through the room. The whisper faded slightly, lingering in corners, brushing walls and floorboards. I exhaled slowly, careful, deliberate, feeling the air hum against my chest. The candle's light trembled softly, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. I stepped back toward the door, careful, boots brushing the creaking boards. The candle flickered once more, shadows curling and stretching, bending into corners I could not reach. The hum softened, lingering in the floor, patient, deliberate. I paused, feeling the air press against my skin, cold and alive. The candle burned steady, shadows still impossibly angled, the room holding its breath with me. The whisper faded, leaving only the soft vibration and the pale, swaying light. I exhaled slowly, stepping out carefully, leaving the room behind. The candle flared once more, a final heartbeat of light in the darkness, and then settled, patient, watching, waiting in the silence. The hallway stretched endlessly before me. The air was thick with dust and something faintly metallic. I pressed forward, boots light against the worn floorboards. I felt someone beside me. No shape, no figure. Just a presence brushing close, patient, deliberate. Footsteps echoed softly, but no sound reached the floor. Only the impression, faint and impossible, threading through the silence. The walls seemed to lean inward, pressing, bending subtly, impossible angles folding around me. The air smelled faintly of old wood and cold stone. I breathed slowly, tasting dust and dampness, the hallway pressing close. A shadow slipped past the corner of my eye. I froze, breath shallow, heart pressing against my ribs. It lingered just at the edge of vision, impossible to grasp. Silence followed, thick, heavy, pressing against my ears and chest. I could feel it there, patient, deliberate, pressing close without moving. I took a careful step forward. The floorboards groaned faintly, though nothing had touched them. The shadow shifted again, bending corners, folding impossibly into the walls. I exhaled slowly, letting air curl in the cold, heavy hallway. The presence remained beside me, patient, deliberate, brushing lightly against my skin. I could feel it fold into the silence, pressing close, waiting. I stepped again, careful, boots brushing dust. The hallway stretched impossibly, light bending along walls and ceiling. The air hummed faintly, a low vibration that threaded through my chest. The shadow moved with me, patient, impossible, always just out of reach. I breathed slow, deliberate, tasting the cold and dust, feeling the presence coil in the silence. The floorboards groaned softly, in rhythm with nothing at all. I paused, letting the quiet press in fully. The presence lingered, brushing along my arm, lingering at my shoulder. The hallway remained endless, the shadow impossible, the air heavy and cold. I exhaled once more, slow, deliberate, and stepped toward the faint light at the far end. The silent footsteps remained, patient, deliberate, impossible. And as I moved, the hallway seemed to stretch further, shadows bending, silence folding, waiting. The night was quiet. Moonlight spilled across the ground, pale and cold. I approached the old window, its glass dark and still. A reflection glimmered, shifting with the faint fog that clung to the pane. Pale eyes appeared just for a heartbeat, watching. I froze, heart pressing against my ribs, breath caught in my throat. I stepped closer. The eyes vanished. Only my own pale reflection remained, trembling in the glass. A soft warmth fogged the window from the other side. I pressed my palm to the cold surface, feeling moisture bead and run along my skin. The warmth lingered, patient, impossible, watching. I pulled back, shivering in the cool night air. The grass smelled damp, clinging to my boots. The air pressed against my face, faintly metallic, carrying the quiet hum of the night. I leaned closer again. The eyes appeared for a moment, pale and unwavering. A shadow lingered behind them, impossible to define, curling just beyond the glass. I wanted to move. I wanted to run. But something compelled me to stay, to watch, to wait. The glass fogged again, spreading from where the face had been. I inhaled slowly, tasting mist and cold stone. The eyes vanished once more, leaving only the quiet, the fog, the cold pressing against my cheeks. Night after night, I returned. The fog would curl across the window, the faint warmth pressing outward. And the eyes would appear, patient, unblinking, pulling at something in me I could not resist. I traced my fingers across the glass. The moisture left small streaks winding like veins. I felt a shiver crawl across my spine, hair standing on end. The moonlight shifted. Shadows along the ground twisted, elongating as if reaching for the window. The eyes lingered in the darkness, pale, quiet, impossibly patient. I stepped back, boots crunching softly on gravel. The night pressed close, cold and still, and yet I found myself returning, compelled, drawn to that darkened window, to those patient, watching eyes. The fog clung. The warmth pressed, and the eyes remained, watching, waiting. The kitchen smelled of old wood and dust. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my boots. A faint draft traced along the edges of the cupboards. I noticed a door, small, almost hidden behind the pantry. The handle was cold in my hand, metal pressing against my palm. I hesitated. The air behind it seemed thicker, heavier, waiting. I pushed. A stale breath rolled out, curling into the room like fog. The cellar yawned open, dark and silent, swallowing the faint light. Stale air pressed on my lungs. It smelled of damp stone and something older, sharper. I stepped down, boots echoing softly against worn steps. Shadows flickered along the walls. Shapes formed, impossible to name, bending with the faint glow of the kitchen light above. I shivered, the shadows stretching toward me, patient, deliberate. A faint scratching sounded from deep within. Soft, slow, deliberate, winding through the darkness. I held my breath, tasting dust and damp, feeling it cling to my skin. I moved carefully, each step measured, pressing against the cold stone walls. The scratching followed, patient, impossible, circling beneath me. The sense of being watched pressed in, heavy, curling around my shoulders. The walls seemed to shift, Faint outlines of shapes, impossible angles bending into the darkness. The cellar smelled of wet stone and the faint tang of something metallic. I leaned closer to the shadows. The scratching stopped. Silence stretched, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. A soft exhale left my lips, curling in the cold air. The cellar remained still, yet the feeling lingered, patient, deliberate, waiting just beyond the corners of vision. I stepped back, boots scraping lightly against the floor. The shadows shifted again, impossible angles twisting toward me. The air felt alive, humming faintly against my chest. I reached for the hidden door. The cellar seemed to sigh as I lifted it, cold breath trailing after me. I climbed back into the kitchen, dust clinging to my sleeves, heart slow and deliberate. I glanced once more into the darkness. The shadows had not moved from the corner where I had paused, but the feeling of eyes remained, patient and endless, watching from beneath the stone. The forest breathed around me, leaves trembling though there was no wind. Fog snaked between the trunks, pale and slow, curling over roots like restless fingers. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. The trees leaned closer. I thought I saw them bend, shadows pooling at the base of gnarled trunks. A low hum threaded through the fog, almost like voices, almost like names. I stepped forward. Leaves rustled softly beneath my boots, though the ground was still. A presence lingered just beyond a thick trunk, patient, watching. The whispering grew, soft and deliberate. Secrets, names, fragments of something I almost understood. I froze. The fog swallowed the path behind me, leaving only pale shapes ahead. Branches scratched at each other, echoing faintly. I felt breath along my neck, though I was alone. Something shifted in the fog, just at the edge of sight, and vanished. I moved slowly. The trees seemed to lean further, creaking softly, murmuring in rhythm with my steps. The ground felt alive beneath my feet, subtle vibrations reaching through the soles of my boots. A name drifted through the mist. My name. I shivered, the hairs on my arms rising. The fog thickened, curling over roots, masking movement. I sensed eyes behind trunks, patient, silent. Every step brought me closer, yet further from something I could not see. Branches reached like skeletal hands brushing my sleeves. The hum deepened, vibrating faintly against my chest. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to silence the whispers, but they persisted. A shadow moved between two trunks, slow and deliberate. I thought it followed me, then it paused, still as stone. My reflection in a droplet of rain on a root showed only darkness, yet I felt it watching. The fog shifted again, revealing only more trees, more shadows. Leaves rustled without wind, scratching at the silence. I breathed slowly, tasting damp earth and the faint tang of something older, deeper. I stepped back, the path behind me swallowed by fog. The whispers lingered, circling, bending with the trees, untraceable. I could feel them leaning in, patient, waiting, curious. The forest pulsed softly, shadows stretching along twisted trunks. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the ground beneath my boots. I exhaled, cold breath curling into the fog, mingling with the whispers. I paused, alone, the trees pressing close, leaves trembling around me. Something shifted just beyond a trunk, too fast to follow, too deliberate to ignore. I stepped forward again, each motion slow, measured, pulled by curiosity and dread alike. The fog wavered. Names whispered, secrets rustled in leaves. The path vanished entirely, and the forest held me, patient, silent, alive. The nursery smelled of milk and old wood. Sunlight struggled through the grimy windows, casting pale stripes across the floorboards. Dust floated in the air, catching faint movement as if stirred by invisible fingers. The cradle rocked slowly, back and forth. No one sat beside it. A lullaby hummed softly, distant, almost swallowed by the walls. I tilted my head, listening, the hum vibrating faintly against my chest. Shadows clung to the corners, gathering, patient, watching. The floor creaked under my weight. I froze. The rocking slowed, hesitant, as if aware of me. The scent of old wood was sharp, mingling with the lingering sweetness of milk. A cold draft brushed my neck, though the windows were closed. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. A whisper, breathless, trembled through the room. "Don't leave." I glanced toward the cradle. The shadows seemed to stretch, leaning closer to the walls as though listening to my heartbeat. The lullaby shifted, notes bending into something hollow, almost pleading. I stepped forward slowly. The wood groaned beneath my foot, echoing in the silence. I felt eyes, unseen, tracking each movement. The rocking accelerated slightly, a hesitant rhythm, back and forth. I reached toward the cradle, fingertips brushing air thicker than dust. It felt colder than the room, almost wet. The shadows pulsed, pooling near the corners of the floor. A faint hum pressed against my temples, vibrating through the quiet. The cradle's motion slowed again, deliberate, patient, watching me now. I inhaled. The air tasted faintly sour, mingled with the sweetness of decay. I noticed a small toy, a wooden horse lying abandoned near the wall. Its paint was chipped, colors dulled, yet it seemed to vibrate faintly under the faint light. The whisper returned. Softer, closer, "Don't leave." I turned, expecting something, but the room remained empty. Only shadows and the rocking cradle. The lullaby hummed again, wavering, almost fragile. I crouched slightly, peering into the empty cradle. The mattress sagged in the middle, but no weight pressed down. A shiver ran down my spine, leaving goose flesh along my arms. The shadows pulled inward, closer to the walls, almost like they were curling around themselves. The hum of the lullaby hummed deeper, vibrating through the floorboards. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat, unrelenting. A breath passed over my ear, cold, lingering. I hadn't moved, yet it felt deliberate, a presence right beside me. I stepped back. The cradle slowed. The rocking stopped. The room fell into near silence, thick, waiting. I glanced once more, hesitant, and the shadows seemed to shrink just slightly. The lullaby faded to a whisper, then nothing but the subtle hum of the wood settling. The cradle remained empty, still, patient. I exhaled slowly. A final draft passed through the room, cold and soft, and the whisper lingered, faint, almost a sigh. "Don't leave." The desk was coated in dust. A single envelope rested atop, edges curled and brittle. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and cold air, like it had traveled far. I bent closer. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet somehow intimate. The ink trembled across the page, dark against pale paper. A cold wind slipped through the cracked window. It fluttered the letter's pages as if impatient. I reached for it, hesitation pressing against my chest. Shadows pooled around the desk, deepening the corners. The air smelled of old paper and something metallic, faint but sharp. I could feel eyes, not mine, tracing the curve of the words. The first line seemed to breathe, a warning, soft, deliberate. "Return! They are watching!" I exhaled slowly, tracing the letters with my finger. The paper felt cold, almost alive under my touch. A low hum pressed through the floorboards, steady, unyielding. The wind shifted, stirring more than the curtains. Shadows quivered over the desk, leaning closer. I hesitated, unsure whether to read further or let it burn unseen. The letter whispered, almost audibly in my mind, "Curiosity leads you here, but do not linger." I swallowed, breath shallow. The edges of the envelope curled more, as though the air itself was tightening. A faint rustle, like fabric brushing, came from the far corner of the room. My hand hovered over the page. Each word seemed to pull me forward, yet warn me back. The scent of old wood and ink wrapped around my senses. I flipped a page. The writing spoke of watching, of nights unending, of paths retraced. A chill climbed my spine, lingering like fog. The wind flared briefly, tossing the paper again. The shadow over the desk stretched, leaning across the letter. I felt a weight behind me, pressing into the nape of my neck. I paused. The room was nearly silent. Only the soft flutter of the pages and my own heartbeat. The hum beneath the floor seemed to echo in the hollows of my skull. I considered burning it. A small fire, a single spark. But even as I imagined flames, the shadow tightened, almost impatient. I pulled the letter closer, tracing the final words with trembling fingers. Regret comes quietly. If you choose to ignore, The wind died. The shadows shrank slightly, retreating to corners, yet never gone. I exhaled slowly, the paper still cold in my hands. I folded it carefully, almost reverently. The room felt heavier, expectant, as if it had been waiting for me to choose. I stepped back from the desk, but the sensation lingered, the watching, the pull. A faint hum remained, soft, steady, almost like breathing. The letter sat there, untouched by fire, yet alive with warning. I felt the weight of curiosity, heavy and lingering, pressing against my chest. I closed the door slowly, careful not to disturb the shadows. The envelope remained on the desk, silent and patient, and I knew I would return. The floor was cold beneath my bare feet. A thin puddle shimmered in the pale moonlight spilling through the broken window. I knelt, drawn to the glassy surface. My face stared back. But something was off. The eyes were too pale, too steady, too patient. I shifted. The reflection lingered, tilting its head after I moved. I swallowed hard, the air thick with dust and damp. Shapes swirled beneath the surface. Impossible forms, twisting and folding in ways a puddle should not allow. The scent of wet stone and cold metal rose into my nose. I reached out. The water trembled, rippling like it had a life of its own. Nothing emerged, yet the surface seemed to whisper secrets it could not name. A soft hum pressed through the floorboards. It vibrated against my chest, slow and deliberate, like the rhythm of a heartbeat not my own. The shadows of the room stretched unnaturally, leaning toward the puddle. I stood slowly, eyes locked on the reflection. It followed, unwavering even as I stepped back. The faint scrape of a floorboard behind me made my breath hitch. A chill slithered along my spine. The shapes beneath the puddle twisted more aggressively, impossible angles forming, then collapsing into darkness. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and something faintly metallic, like rust. I blinked. The puddle still held the face, my face, but not mine. A silent awareness lingered, studying, waiting. I tried to tear my gaze away. The pale eyes remained. The reflection moved, when I did not, mimicking intentions I had not chosen. The room seemed to shrink, walls pressing in slowly, silently. The hum deepened, resonating through the floor and into my bones. I felt a presence behind the puddle, something patient, endlessly patient. The water rippled again. The shapes dissolved into murky suggestion, revealing nothing and everything. I sensed forms beyond sight, glimpsed movements at the edge of perception. A breath of air stirred across my neck, cold, faintly damp. A warning I could not interpret. I shivered, stepping back, yet unable to leave the puddle behind. The pale eyes blinked, or I thought they did. The reflection seemed to mock the limits of my own body. A soft static buzzed in the air, low, almost inaudible, vibrating against my temples. I crouched again, compelled, terrified. The puddle held its secrets just below the surface, endless and patient. Shapes twisted and folded again, then vanished with a single ripple. I exhaled slowly. The hum receded, the shadows relaxed slightly, yet the eyes remained, waiting for me to look away. I backed from the puddle. The reflection stayed, a silent reminder that some things watch long after you've thought yourself alone. The room fell into stillness. Only the faint scent of wet stone lingered. I stepped away, but the pale reflection waited, patient and cold, as if it had always been there and would always be. The field stretched into gray nothingness. Fog rolled low, heavy and damp, curling around my ankles. A cold breeze whispered over the tall grass, carrying the scent of wet earth. At the edge of the field, a lantern flickered to life. Pale light spilling into the mist, swaying slightly as if breathing. I paused, feeling the hum of energy in the air, vibrating against my chest. Shapes moved inside the lantern's glow. Impossible forms, twisting, folding, disappearing when I blinked. The fog clung tighter around me like it did not want me to move. I stepped closer. Soft whispers drifted across the field, urging me forward. My footsteps were muted, swallowed by the thick air. The lantern swung gently, though there was no wind. Faint images danced around its light, faces I could almost recognize, shadows stretching and bending. I felt a hum beneath my feet, a vibration that made the ground seem alive. Each step toward it made the fog swirl faster. I could hear breathing that was not mine, soft, shallow, deliberate. The shapes flickered and twisted, teasing the edge of my vision. I reached the edge of the lantern's glow. The whispers became almost words, barely audible, coaxing me nearer. The air smelled of damp hay and smoke, ancient and faintly sweet. I leaned in, trying to see the shapes clearly. They dissolved at once, leaving only the lantern suspended in fog. The field behind me was empty, silent. A shiver ran down my spine. The light flickered once, then steadied, steady and solitary. It swayed, untouched, as if aware of my gaze. I took a slow step back. The fog shifted, rolling over the lantern like a shroud. The whispers receded, leaving a low, constant hum in my ears. The field felt infinite. No shapes, no shadows, only the lantern swaying alone. I realized the light was not guiding me anywhere. It was simply waiting. A cold breeze brushed my neck. I inhaled the damp, earthy air, tasting metal faintly on my tongue. The hum pressed gently against my chest, soft but insistent. I stayed, unable to look away. The lantern swung silently, fragile, eternal. Fog twisted around it, wrapping the light, hiding everything else. I reached out my hand, almost touching it. The air was warmer there, a small pulse of life in the cold night. Yet when I stepped closer, the field stretched farther, empty again. I exhaled, breath trembling. The shapes had vanished. The whispers gone. Only the lantern remained, swaying lightly, alone and patient. I stepped back, feeling the wet grass press against my legs. The fog rolled gently over my feet. The hum faded slowly, leaving silence that was almost complete. The lantern lingered in the mist, pale, steady, impossible to reach fully. I could not leave it behind, and yet I could not touch it. I turned away at last, but the light remained. A soft presence in the fog, patient and unending. The final lantern, alone, eternal, waiting. The road back to the farmhouse was quiet. Fog draped over the fields, heavy and pale. Each step through the wet grass pressed softly into the earth, muffled, alone. The farmhouse waited. Or perhaps it had been waiting all along. Its shape was wrong, smaller somehow, distorted as if the night had bent it. I paused at the edge of the porch. The boards creaked under my weight, uneven, fragile. A faint smell of smoke and damp wood lingered in the air. Windows reflected empty skies. No moon, no stars, only my own shadow stretching thin and long across the planks. The air was still, thick with silence, doors open to nothing. I pressed my hand to the frame, feeling chill seep through the wood. Inside, walls curved oddly, impossible angles, as if the house had shifted while I wasn't looking. The porch light flickered once, then again, a weak pulse of yellow in the fog. I stepped forward. Soft wind brushed my cheek, carrying the faint scent of hay and cold earth. Shadows clung to corners that should not exist. A hum rose in the distance, low and resonant, vibrating in my chest. I reached for the door handle, but the wood felt thinner, almost unreal. I stepped across the threshold. The floor seemed to ripple beneath me, faintly, like water. Every familiar corner was unfamiliar. The hum grew softer, almost a whisper, fading into the walls. I turned, expecting a room behind me, but there was only more fog. The windows reflected nothing. I felt the house exhale, a breath of cold, stale air. The boards underfoot shifted lightly, then held still. I walked slowly, each footstep absorbed by the quiet, the mist, the night. The porch light pulsed once more. I reached the steps, feeling the fog curl around my legs, damp and patient. And then I stepped forward. The farmhouse was gone. Nothing remained but the field, the fog, the muted hum of distant trees. No walls, no roof, no doorways. The air pressed softly on my lungs. A silence settled, thick and complete. I could hear nothing but my own shallow breath. I looked back. The ground was flat, empty, stretching endlessly in gray. Even the porch light had vanished, swallowed by the night. I exhaled slowly, feeling the fog slide across my skin. The strange weight of the house, The twisting angles, the impossible doors, was gone. Nothing waited, nothing watched. The night held me, quiet and patient. I walked through the mist alone, and for the first time, I did not feel pursued. The air smelled of damp grass, faint smoke, and the promise of nothing. I turned once more toward the empty space. A faint echo of the house lingered like a memory pressing at the edge of thought, but it was gone. I continued walking. The fog wrapped around me, soft like a shroud. Silence stretched endlessly ahead, carrying the gentle hum of the night. The farmhouse had vanished, and with it, the weight of waiting. Only the field remained. I breathed in the cool air, feeling the fog slip between my fingers. For the first time, the night felt infinite, yet strangely calm. I was alone, and yet not afraid. The emptiness was quiet, patient, and complete. I exhaled again, letting the night swallow the last trace of the house, and I walked onward step by soft step into the endless gray.